This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio. Welcome to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. Joan and Janet are subtle energy empaths who navigate consciousness. Their passion is to support you in your evolution. As consciousness, we are all one. One mind, one heart, free of all limitations. Experience this reality with us and discover how it can make a difference in your daily living. Join us in a state of grace as we explore, with warmth and humor, this thing we call life. Now, here are Joan Newcomb and Janet Barrett.
Welcome to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. We're your co-host, Joan Newcomb, coming to you from planet Earth, and Janet Barrett is coming to you from Portland, Oregon.
Joan's coming from Tacoma, Washington today, and that's pretty far away, obviously, you can tell. So, hello, everyone. Glad you're with us today. What are we going to talk about with them today, Joan?
Well, today we are talking about generational patterns. We all have family patterns running through us that stretch back for generations. They're invisible because they sometimes originated hundreds of years ago. So we just accept that this is just how it is. So today we are going to be talking about how to easily and effortlessly, as consciousness, transform these energies.
Lots of good stuff up. And here's an invitation to go deeper with us, to connect with us beyond the show. You can join us at our website, www.consciousconversationswithjoanandjanet.com. And there you're going to find all of these podcasts that we've been doing for the last couple of years. You'll also see connections to our blogs. You can read them there. Joan writes on Fridays and I write on Mondays. We write about what's going on in life that we notice in our groups and things. And also our schedule for our meetups. Joan does hers in the Puget Sound area of Seattle, Washington. And I do mine here in Portland, Oregon. And let me see. And about our sessions. We both work with clients one-on-one in different situations, on Skype and on telephone, etc. So there's plenty of ways to connect with us. And Joan's going to give you all that great social media information that we have.
Social media, yes. Well, the first thing that comes to mind in terms of social media is Facebook. So if Facebook is your favorite, you can go to Facebook and find our show by typing in Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. And join the group and join the fun. Now, if you're curious about Janet on Facebook, her name is Janet Barrett, and you can find her consciousness cookies and all sorts of groovy things there. I am Joan Newcomb, so you type that in and you'll find my Facebook page and all the fun things that I do and share there. You can also follow us on Twitter. The show is at Joan and Janet on Twitter. I am at Joan Newcomb on Twitter, and I retweet lots of things on Twitter. And then Janet is at Janet Beyond, and she does all her consciousness cookies there. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a second, because the last social media that I can think of, yes, there's Tumblr, there's lots of others, but we're on YouTube. So if you like YouTube, you can find the show Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet on YouTube. And I'm on YouTube.
Yeah, and LinkedIn. I want to thank all those people who joined me on LinkedIn. That's very nice, and I appreciate that.
But is the show on LinkedIn?
I don't know. My consciousness cookies and my weekly writings go out on LinkedIn, and I get people contacting me back every day, and it's always so very nice when it's unsolicited, and you go, oh, all right, because I don't put out anything other than my consciousness cookies and my blog writings once a week. So I'm about as non-obtrusive as you can get in a public forum, I guess. So what do we want people to know this week? What do we got going, Joan? I have my Zoom play groups that are running now on Thursdays mornings at 10 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. Pacific time. You can join me with using Zoom video conferencing. And those groups are ongoing, so you can join in. It's pretty much just like being here because you get to see each other and we live interact. So it's not like a webinar. This is where we all get to participate at the same time, and that's good. Now you've got groups going this week, do you, Joan?
Yes, I have meetups. Janet, by the way, we didn't quite mention that you do your meetups in your lovely home on
that's true too. Yeah.
Tuesday nights and on Thursday afternoons.
Yeah.
And you can find the link to join that on our website, by the way, Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. I do meetups all around the Puget Sound, and this Sunday, the 18th, the day after St. Patrick's Day, I am in University Place at the University Place Library doing a Conscious Conversations there from 2 to 4 p.m. You can join us and have an amazing experience. It's slightly different than Janet's Conscious Conversations in Portland. The week after that, I am at the Emerald Spiral Expo, which is March 24th. That's a Saturday, and they are in the Kent Commons in Kent, Washington. So I have a booth there. I think it's booth 50, and I'm there all day long. But I'm also doing a special talk at 1 o'clock about living beyond limitations and how to live with infinite possibilities. And so that's at 1 o'clock on Saturday the 24th, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, all kinds of good ways to be in the flow with all that's going on. You can reach me at janetb@janetandbeyond.com. And if you want to register for my any of my groups, and we'll get you registration packets and that info out there. But let's see, what are we talking about today, Joan? We got lots of things going on out here in the world.
We do. We are talking about generational patterns. It is something that you and I have both noticed. Both in your groups and for me individually as well, about these family patterns that are running through us. And we don't even recognize them. We just act as if this is what life is normally is, and we just kind of accept it. And it's just amazing because we will be running off of patterns that have been going back since, my family came over from Ireland.
Right. And, so often it's the family you don't know.
Yes.
Right. It's those family connections that are like, okay, if you go back, I think it's 5 generations to your great grandparents, you have 32 different families that are now on your family tree to get to you. And maybe a couple. I doubt any of us know all those connections. And all that is within us in that genetic imprinting that we have. And we see this so much in group right now. People are dealing with an issue, and it's just got a lot of beginnings or the middles or the ends or whatever, because there is no time and space and consciousness. But it's an old pattern that's been running generational wise. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that just occurred to me is that sometimes we may have an inkling that this isn't the way to do it. This isn't the way to live our lives, and so we run out to try to find it in having a different relationship. And no matter how far you run, there you are. So it'll show up. It'll show up even if you're trying to avoid it or you resist it or try to go to what you think the exact opposite is. It'll just show back up in your life. Isn't that fun? That's so much fun. Oh, I love that. No.
Well, we for some reason we like to think we're independent. I mean, the United States is built on being independent and all that. But the truth is we're all community and we're all connected and we're all out of families and clans and organizations. And any of that can have an influence and often does, have an influence. And so you may not be holding awareness of how you relate, but it's kind of like those wonderful ancestral shows that are on TV, exploring things, and you realize you don't match up to anyone in your family per se, your immediate family, but there it was, your great grandfather and your grandfather before that and your mother over there all had the same kind of dynamic that you're embodying. And it's just, I love those shows because you get to see how energy just doesn't stop. It gets into a pattern and it's going to show up, and it shows up every so often, and whatever every so often is. So lots of ways to look at things.
I love those shows, and it just occurs to me how one I'm thinking of, they not only go beyond, what they can research and find several generations back, but then they cap it off with doing DNA testing, which shows that,
Yeah.
your origins were in deepest, darkest Africa or Asia or something like that. Because I think the ultimate point is to show that we are all connected on a physical level. And
Right.
And I have more to say about that, about how we are all connected, but also what goes beyond physical, which is something that these shows I don't really go into. They'll tell you the details of people's lives, but they won't look at the patterns the way that you and I look at them.
They don't. But it's enough to generate thought and curiosity, and that's the good part of it.
Well, we are going to talk more about this in just a moment. It's a lot of juicy stuff, but we're going to keep you in suspense because we have to take a commercial break right now. So stay tuned, because we are going to be talking about generational patterns when we come right back.
Is your soul calling you to do something more meaningful with your life? Do you feel crazy for wanting to quit your secure job? Perhaps you are waiting until you retire to do what you love. Maybe you are too daunted to follow your dream. If any of these match your life, then Joan Newcomb's Purpose and Passion Coaching Program is just for you. In just 12 weeks, you will discover who you essentially are and why you are here. Learn to live as your greater self and navigate with conscious mastery. Go to joan-newcomb.com. That's joan-newcomb.com for all of her coaching programs. Would you like a fresh approach to the challenges you are dealing with? Take a journey into your enlightenment with Janet Barrett. Janet is a subtle energies empath, accessing the field of potential with warmth, humor, and support. She will help you to hear what your inner voice is saying. She will share with you how to appreciate who you are now and offer you new ways to understand and transform your issues. Reach her at www.janetandbeyond.com. That's janetandbeyond.com. Again, janetandbeyond.com. Transformation is possible. You can enjoy new outcomes in your current experiences. They can happen in the blink of an eye.
You are listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. To reach our program, please send questions and comments to consciouswithjoanandjanet@gmail.com. That's consciouswithjoanandjanet@gmail.com. Now, back to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet.
Welcome back. You're listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. I'm your host, Joan, along here with Janet, and we are talking about generational patterns.
Lots of dynamics out there getting worked. And we're talking today family. There's also societal generational patterns that we are really noticing that are up. And we are interacting. We are dynamic energy forms, right? Whatever you call us. And there are so many influences going on around us, and we can't track all that. But on some level, it's being held. And where it becomes important or has meaning is when there's something you want to do or think or a different behavior you want, and it doesn't seem to be doable. And so we open this up when we were taking the stance as consciousness and heart-centered awareness. And that's the active state that says, oh, freed of the emotions, how does this pattern just turn into energies? And then stuff happens. And then a lot of times that's where all this will come up, the awareness of how far back it is.
Yes. And you said something there that what I am noticing, how I am noticing it now, it's doing something kind of similar, is that I can almost see it as like vibrational waves that just sort of stretch out into the distance. And we have these waves running through our energy systems, or through our awareness, and they influence our behaviors, our choices, and our actions. And we can't, we don't see them because it's always been there. So we just assume that's the way it is. And you just mentioned sort of a very effortless way to also break out of those patterns, not to run to the end, because that's, we're telling people different ways to do this, but getting into a neutral space and a non-reactive space to it definitely does help collapse that pattern, to shift it into a different way. And what I think about is how people have been trying to do this on a sort of body, mind, spirit level for decades. I mean, the body, just look at people sailing to America to try to get away from previous patterns. They've sailed to America for a new life, and then they recreate it here.
Recreate it, right. Yeah, right.
And then also, there was something else along that that I'm on a boat sailing into New York Harbor right now, and I completely lost the second part of that. What were you about to say, Janet?
Oh, I don't know. I think I'm on the rowboat behind you.
Right. I see you're tired.
Well, some of the things that come to mind is we do look at, it's how we look at how we're experiencing life. And it's getting free of the biases. And I like to look at energy free of the human influences. Okay. And so those are in my emotions. And those are the way I'm predicated myself to observe things. So as consciousness, I get to look at all this stuff with no filter there, or with realizing where my filters are, and doing my best to get beyond that. So one thing we have is genetic DNA generational patterns, right? You can see it in families, in the body, and in the health patterns, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the physical DNA markers like we were talking about a little bit ago. I think there's also in that, there's the emotional markers just as much. And those you can't see. Those you can feel. And I think everything has an imprint on these different ways that we experience information in this human form. And that doesn't mean it's not real because you can't see it, because we're full of consciousness that is what we know about is really little, quite little in the whole scheme of things. And so there's imprinting that's taken place. There's information that's in different place. There's information that's showing up as vibrational patterns and resonances that coincide, that run parallel, that mirror each other. There's all kinds of different ways that we experience energy. In just labeling something doesn't mean that's the only way it is. It just means in that moment, in that context, that's the way we've observed it. And you can really see, once you open up, how that plays generational and family lines and stuff.
I just remembered the second part that I was going to say. It kind of feeds into what you were talking about, but dealing with it on the mind level. If you think about, Freud was just a little over like 120 years ago, something like that. And people who would enter into psychoanalysis in order to deal with these family patterns on a mental, psychological level. And they would be in therapy. They will be in therapy their entire lives to unravel these things like a step at a time. So what we're talking about when you're doing this energetically, that doing it as consciousness, you can shift a pattern into something completely different beyond what your mind can imagine. And it's an easy and effortless, to use my language, easy and effortless way to completely transform that and be in a different space with it.
Well, when you look at things on a vibrational level, then there's something's vibrating. And when you look at information that way, using that metaphor, you can see that things aren't necessarily solid. There's movement in that. If it can be observed that way, it can be felt that way. Where'd that go? Something just went.
That's how quickly it can disappear.
I think that's it. It's just, and that's not to make any judgment about therapy and all the different kinds of behavioral sciences and all that. Yeah, that's all great work. What we're looking at it is in a way that says, here it is and there it isn't. And here it is and there it isn't. And here it is and there it isn't. And it's in catching it, allowing that to be real, that it's in the being present. You're not in the past, you're not in the future. You're right now in a free zone, and anything is possible. And then you can look at that generational information and see that, and you can change how you relate to it. And that's what we're talking about. And that can happen in an instant.
Right.
And so it's not about the story so much, unless that starts to show up, and that's really important, because that just holds a focus, and that just makes it more so. And we're looking at it in the sense of that's just a placement in consciousness, and that's serving as a marker, and here's another marker, and there's another marker, and oh my goodness, the markers just all moved. And what happens when the markers move? Right. And it's taking the weight off the emotional body and stressors out of things. And this is what I call reframing. And if you read my blog this week, that's what it's all about, is when you take that tightness, because the power of an emotion is that it locks in something. And sometimes that's useful and sometimes it's not. So we're looking at places where your emotions have entangled us into something. And now here we are 5 years later, and we don't want to go there or whatever, because we think we have to get into the emotional resonance and hurt like we did before. And the reality is you don't have to do that. You can free it up. And so it's a different way of engaging our information.
And you brought this up. What happens now when you can work on it on this energetic level is that the change can be instantaneous. The change can happen quicker. But however, in the past, things did take a really long time to manifest. Just think, it took people a really long time to get to the United States. They had to be in a boat, for 6 months. Right. And now you can be there in 5 hours, depending on where you're flying from. So, even less if you're flying from Toronto to Rochester. So we can make these changes more quickly, and we can also shift these generational patterns more quickly. And a way you can think of it is that our generational patterns were like the structure that we were born into, and we then get kind of frightened about changing that structure. We don't want the structure to change because suddenly we won't have a house to live in anymore. And what actually happens is that you can shift and change, and your own inner foundation becomes more strong. And it doesn't mean that your family won't talk to you anymore, though sometimes that happens and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it means that you can there's actually a way of making those changes now that doesn't require geographical rules, doesn't require you to immigrate to another country or something in order to have a different experience. You can actually even show up and all your family members are still there, and they're all behaving differently now. In a good way.
That's one thing I've noticed over the years in doing this work is why everything seems so intense this lifetime. And it was just very much that so much is about right now and being able to access right now in our sophistication of how we experience information. And it's interesting because sophisticated tends to mean that something has refined itself, whatever. And it's kind of like you take the raw data and you kind of refine it in some way. And that's really basically what I think psyches are and souls are and everything, And so there's the raw information, and that's kind of like what happens when you're born. You're in a state of raw information, and everything just comes in. And so often it's about what you let go of as much as what you bring in. And, I'm taken with a lot of animals and insects. They use someone else's burrow. They don't dig their own hole. They don't make their own house. A lot of times they're very smart and they use what's already present. And then it's a matter of house cleaning a bit and making it fit you. And maybe we're kind of like that sometimes too. It's a different way of looking at
it. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it's like, well, why be like this? Right? And I have such a history of life was pain and physical pain. And I don't have that anymore. So I've decided that life is about enjoying myself. And it's easier mentally to do that or psychically or spiritually or sometimes more so than my physical. But I know that I'm not just my physical body. And I know that the way I think it can often be emotionally related to how I'm viewing my life. And so what do I want to do with this life? And I ask those questions of myself. And I want to enjoy my life. So that means I'm going to redo or let go of or acknowledge how I experience something and go, well, is that what I want now? No, I don't like that. So I'd like something else. And so I'm open to, well, where's that coming from and what if it could just be different? And if it's in that state of, well, what if it could just be different as consciousness and it changes. And if in that state of, well, what if it could be different and information shows up and it shows me a different way to look at that, free of that emotional connection, stuff happens too. And so that's the way I like to live life. And that's what we want our listeners to be able to know can be real for them too. They can do exactly what you and I do all the time. Take those 50, 60 years and, we've consolidated it down to this and realizing, okay, stuff happens. And what do I want to do with the stuff that happens?
That's actually brought up a good point, because if you have a generational pattern that life sucks, that life is hard, that you have to do things you hate, then it's not a very enjoyable experience being here. And that's, when you shift that paradigm to, I'm just going to enjoy life. I mean, let me ask you this, Janet. So your decision to enjoy life, did that invalidate all your family that died in concentration camps?
No, not at all. It's part of the whole. It's part of the spectrum. It's the part that helps me to appreciate and be grateful for what I have. And in knowing that there are those in my family lines that did not have this opportunity to walk differently on this earth. I think I'm doing them, giving them great honor and respect by going, I have an opportunity to change it where you perhaps did not. And that is my reality. And their reality is a part of my reality. And in transforming that dynamic to transcending that energy of that old stuck stuff into light, into grace, I think they are released because there is no time or space in consciousness. And so in a way that they feel trapped, or perhaps trapped in their experience of what life was at that moment, they too, that energy can be different. And that's my connection. That's why we are not separate from others. It's because that's an open, viable track. There is no death to me. There is just a different exchange of energy that's happening there. Potential is reintroduced into the pattern. And I am that generation past it. And you can experience all that as real. We do it all the time in group. That's great.
That's actually lovely, and it brought about three different things that ran through my head as you were talking. But it's like
go for it.
we don't, but we don't have to be locked into suffering because our ancestors suffered. Right. And also, if a loved one has died or many loved ones have died, doesn't mean that you have to be that it doesn't dishonor them to go on to enjoy life. It reminded me of an experience I went through some years ago, and I've shared before that somebody I love died, and I felt like I couldn't keep going, and yet I had the spiritual awareness of, this life being like it's an adventure in density and effort, or it's like swim time was the image I got. It's like we get to dive into the pool, and this is the adult swim, or this is the hour I get to paddle about. And people, there is no right or wrong to when people jump into the pool or jump out of the pool, or how long they stay in the pool. But on a level of consciousness, we are all still connected. That, like you said, there is no death. So I might as well enjoy the pool for as long as I am in it. And this ties into that. And I made the comment about the concentration camps, but I also think about how there are family members who can be upset with me or you, or family members can be upset when you change the pattern in front of them, and they have been lockstepped into doing, what has come before. So, who are you to break out of this? Who are you to have a better life, kind of thing? And what do you got? What do you?
Well, we see it happening around us. Next week we get more into societal things. We see it with the kids in the school saying, who am I to challenge you? I'm me. I'm not you. Those were your limits. Those don't have to be my limits, and I'm going to state mine. And that's why this is so incredibly powerful time, is that this is a time of self-leadership. You want to know, I've been saying this since 2000. In my awareness of where I have been tracking stuff. The reason we didn't have strong leadership is it's a time people have to learn to lead themselves. And you can be followers. There's nothing wrong with being a follower till you wind up following like a lemming off the cliff. Oh, and by the way, Disney set that up and lemmings don't do that. Yeah, I know all that. It's just the herd mentality that we can get caught up in.
I didn't know that lemmings don't fall off of cliffs. What do you mean?
Yeah, that apparently was Disney did that in some way.
I'm going to research that.
Anyway.
Sorry, what were you really talking about?
What do they do? It's the herd mentality. You know how you get in the herd and then there you go, right? And you don't, unless you work your way to the outside. And that's what a lot of them do. Look at the penguins and stuff. They're always rotating themselves. Everyone gets a chance to be cold and everyone gets a chance to be warm, kind of thing. It's just the dynamics that you can get into. So there you go.
Yes,
I'm off the hill with the lemmings. Okay.
There we go. Great. So actually, I'll touch base with what you said in with different languaging, and that's something I had seen from about the same time as I was going into 2000 when I shifted into coaching. And the thing I really liked about coaching is that it views you as whole and capable, and that if you have some issue that you're dealing with, you have within you the ability to resolve it. And prior to that, with the idea of therapy, even though there's a lot of therapists out there that you desire to do coaching, their training is that, there's something wrong with you and there's symptoms to diagnose and all those sorts of things. So what I saw, how this resonated with me is I saw you described it perfectly because you talked about self-leadership. And, as a coach, what I do is I acknowledge you as whole and capable. I hold space for you that's whole and capable. I ask you powerful questions that bring the answers out from within you. And I feel that with my teaching now because, I've been teaching since like 1982 or something like that. And what I notice now, it's like, I always inherently knew that I'm not the only holder of wisdom here, that you are, fully your consciousness. Therefore, you are also, the cosmic internet as well. And we have the ability now, the thing that has been evolving so quickly in the last, 18, 20 years we're talking about here. What's been evolving so quickly is that we can access that cosmic internet within us, and we can act with our own authority or seniority. And that's what those kids, the kids in Florida, Parkland, Florida, are modeling to us. They're standing up and they're speaking their truth. We couldn't even do this in certain ways, even last year.
I think what is something I'm catching from your reframing there is that I think we're catching more awareness of is when someone's trying to control us, make us feel bad, judge us. And I think, it's, if you change, then that means I might have to change. And I might not have the resources to do that. And I'm in a habituated spot to maintain that this is the way things are. And you outside of your fresh are going to keep challenging me. And sometimes I don't want to be challenged. And I'm just going to say, no, that's the way it is. And I have no more to say about it. And I think any child has a parent at some point who doesn't have a response. They just have a reaction. They shut down. They can't explain themselves, right? And they just feel this emotional overload or overwhelm or something. And I think what I'm seeing is that people are starting to catch when somebody says something. And they're starting to hear the bias. They're starting to hear the attitude. They're starting to hear, well, this is the way I'm going to treat you. And they're realizing it's not what they like. That is so exciting. Now, as consciousness, living in that household, it might be a challenge, and you might have to learn how to bring balance into that for yourself. But that's what I think. What's possible here? What's different here?
I can relate to that in my own family patterning. And one of the things I remember was my father was visiting, and we were driving to the Air and Space Museum, and my kids were roughhousing in the back, and he suddenly turned around and he hit one of them. And we drove to the Air and Space Museum in silence. And then when we got out, he was saying, I know how I felt when Grandpa, McCabe, hit one of the boys the first time. And I said, no. I said, that's unacceptable. We don't hit in our family. You are, that's an out of control adult. I mean, I really literally didn't, almost instead of driving to the museum, drove him to my brother's house to leave him there. Yeah. And what I think about is that what was acceptable to do to a child in 1930, it wasn't acceptable to do to a child in 1995 or whenever this was. And yet we perpetuate, that's an example of perpetuating family patterns and then waking up to that's not okay anymore. And another part of that is that my brothers certainly don't recognize that we grew up in an atmosphere of domestic violence, because that was going on, physically hitting kids just out of the blue, not ritualized spanking, which I have questions with as well, but just, being hit out of the blue for no reason. And also emotional abuse, which hasn't been acknowledged as as a level of abuse. And now it is. So it's the thing that is happening is greater light is being shone on our family patterns, and suddenly we're like, this is not comfortable, and we don't want this resonating through our space anymore.
Well, I think what you're also mentioning, Joan, is how we can observe ourselves in our process and not like how we're showing up, but we don't seem to be able to change it.
Yeah.
And there is that great frustration, I think, that people have. And that's why we offer to you, our listeners, and to those that will listen, live listeners and later on listeners, or however we want to orchestrate all that, is we just want to be clear that if you just go to this place of consciousness where there is no bias, where it's just grace, there's support, non-judgment, and you can feel that. You can feel the calm. You can feel the peace. That's the way we identify it in group as sacred. We're doing it all the time. And look at your information from there, that positioning, and you become aware of how you've been holding yourself. And you can start to undo. And it can be quite profound. And we all serve as witness, and we all serve in wonderful, marvelous ways. And so it's just inviting ourselves to look at maybe some of these things. And you don't have to try and change everything. What you want to do is start from a place of appreciation about who you are. And those people were probably doing the best they could given their circumstances. Now, there's a great power, once again, in, well, that's the way it's been, and that's the way it'll always be. And the neighbors are doing it that way, and so it's okay. And we're getting free of that. We're starting to loosen these things, and I know next week we'll talk some more about this, about what is important to you. How would you like to be treated, and that you treat others in the same way, and you do it to your family. That's the best place to start. There you have the most to work out with.
I heard you say do it to your family. I think do it with your family.
Whatever I said there.
Yeah. Yeah, and our changing the pattern within our family creates a ripple effect. Out beyond our family. I remember doing something, it was just energetic, and it was in one of these personal growth things I was going through in the 80s. And I had this feeling of stepping out of a line of dominoes. And that I was really messing with the family pattern because I wasn't in there as part of the mechanism. So, those of us who have been light bringers from a while back really felt probably out of sync with our families, felt like aliens, and felt like there was something wrong with us. And now that there is greater light in the world, more of this is showing up and being reflected, intolerant behaviors being reflected as this is intolerant. So suddenly it's like, all those words.
Well, it's time getting close to our break time.
That's what I was feeling too. So we have about a minute to bobble through. So listen, okay. There are some more things to say about this, but we will keep you hanging in suspense again. So we have to take another commercial break, but stay tuned because we are talking about generational patterns when we come right back.
Is your soul calling you to do something more meaningful with your life? Do you feel crazy for wanting to quit your secure job? Perhaps you are waiting until you retire to do what you love. Maybe you are too daunted to follow your dream. If any of these match your life, then Joan Newcomb's Purpose and Passion Coaching Program is just for you. In just 12 weeks, you will discover who you essentially are and why you are here. Learn to live as your greater self and navigate with conscious mastery. Go to joan-newcomb.com. That's joan-newcomb.com for all of her coaching programs. Would you like a fresh approach to the challenges you are dealing with? Take a journey into your enlightenment with Janet Barrett. Janet is a subtle energies empath accessing the field of potential with warmth, humor, and support. She will help you to hear what your inner voice is saying. She will share with you how to appreciate who you are now and offer you new ways to understand and transform your issues. Reach her at www.janetandbeyond.com. That's janetandbeyond.com. Again, janetandbeyond.com. Transformation is possible. You can enjoy new outcomes in your current experiences. They can happen in the blink of an eye.
You are listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. To reach our program, please send questions and comments to consciouswithjoanandjanet@gmail.com. That's consciouswithjoanandjanet@gmail.com. Now, back to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet.
Welcome back. You're listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. I'm your host, Joan, along here with Janet, and we are talking about generational patterns.
There's lots of them. They're everywhere, and so most of us don't know what they are till we run up against them. And, one thing we do in group is, depending upon how the information shows up, and everybody's got a position about something, you have some issue, you have something that's challenging you, and you go, okay, and if we were to notice something about that would be useful, or however it is in that moment, because it's always going to be different in that moment. And then there's the story that unfolds, and you don't want to get distracted by the story, and you don't want to use that as the focus, because then it just becomes more so. But in just noticing it in that state, you can see there's the emotional stripping away of it. There's some dynamics that are at play. And, oh yeah, okay, so we're going to go back in time. And that's from where we're registering. Who has the issue is the human, right? Consciousness doesn't have an issue. The human. So we go back in time on that person's timeline, and we see all the places where information is relating to this now. And we allow that to collapse. And then we might look in the future if that shows up and see where it plays out. Because you have to remember there's no time and space in consciousness. So we're not the end all here. We're the center of it all, all at the same time. And there could be things in the future that you're getting hung up on where that pattern's been playing. If nothing changed, that's where it would continue. And so you collapse that. And then all of a sudden you might experience right now being a little different and feeling different, because you don't have quite that tethered emotional pull. And then everything kind of gets loosey-goosey, and that's exactly where you want to be. So change is possible. As change in the moment, you will notice it in the moment in some way as you develop your sensory about it. And then it's the fun part is to see what happens, right? And allowing for something to be different, and how you want your family. How would you like to relate to them? A lot of us don't like our families. Come on, let's be honest. And is it possible for that to be different? What if they didn't bother you that way? Doesn't mean you have to be overwhelmingly excited, but what if you were more neutral? That might be useful, right? So.
Well, I was thinking in my own life, and I gave that example of my father and how then at the very end, I went back to help him pass at home. And the thing I was reflecting on is that for many years, I had no intention of returning to Washington, D.C. I remember being at a workshop down in Portland with you at I think it was the Waldorf School. And and I just remember coming away from that going, there's no way I would ever go back to Washington, D.C., that it's not safe to enter those patterns. And, then who knows, 8 years later, I'm walking into it. And I we can evolve ourselves. We can evolve to a state of being able to be different in that reality and no longer affected by those patterns. And I've also witnessed, people showing up as completely different than their historical characters as well. And that doesn't invalidate you that you went through stuff like that with them, but it validates that we can have completely different experiences now.
I love your reference, historical character, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever you hear yourself use the word always, never, you got to be careful. You're already on alert, right? Because you've taken out the highs and lows and you've settled for this, and this is my experience of you, and it's locked in. And that's something that goes too, is because you realize that that's you in some relation to what they represent, and that starts to change. So you just might find you have a different experience as someone because they are different, or how you relate to them is different. They haven't changed at all. It's just how you relate to them. So there's lots of different ways to experience being with family and maybe free of some of the ways they are, and to appreciate them because they are your creation. There's no victims and victimizers here in consciousness. It's just how you're choosing to show up and the roles you're choosing to play and the game you've designed and all that kind of stuff. And when you start to go, well, if something else was possible, and you're in that place of openness and unfolding, then maybe something else possible will show up, and it usually does.
That launches us into a whole deeper topic that we don't have time to go into today.
No.
Which is just about my awareness of life being a creation of consciousness. And if you think of this as like a video game, you can shift to a different track of the game and have a completely different experience, which also means even collapsing the characters in the game.
Yeah.
So, and it also, we've touched base and we've danced a lot about next week's topic, which is going to be about these generational patterns in society. As well.
Right.
So I'm all about keeping us in suspense about that, but not keeping you in suspense about how to go deeper with us and connect with us beyond the show. Do you want to tell them about that, Janet?
Connect with us beyond the show. Oh, you can go to our website at consciousconversationswithjoanandjanet.com. And we have all about our podcasts, and those are these shows. We have our blogs. Joan writes on Fridays, I write on Mondays, and those are great. Also, find out about working one-on-one with us or in group situations with me. So I think there's just, and we've got our meetups will be posted there, and Joan's going to be doing the Emerald Spiral here soon, I think on the 25th, and lots of different ways to find community. And that's what we want to support you in, finding your community. And here we are. So there you go. That's all I got to say, John. You do the social.
Okay, right. Well, the social thing's pretty simple, and I'm pretty certain I should really just go check our website. Go check our website, because I'm pretty certain that we have links to all our social there.
Yeah.
And you can find us on Facebook, Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet, or Janet Barrett, or Joan Newcomb, and just join us and join the fun there. You can find us on Twitter at Joan and Janet, or at Joan Newcomb, or at Janet Beyond. And then you can subscribe to us on YouTube, and almost all our past shows. Our past shows are quickly being put onto YouTube, so you can binge listen to us on YouTube. And then I do a weekly YouTube video on my YouTube channel, Joan Newcomb. And you can also find that video on our website, Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. And we have a few things coming up really quick, and then I'll let Janet tell her about the things going on in Portland. But I have a meetup in University Place on the 18th of March at the University Place Library from 2 to 4. So join us there to have conscious conversations. And then you can also see me at the Emerald Spiral Expo, which is in Kent, Washington, on March the 24th from 9 to 5. I have a booth there, and I'm going to be doing a special talk, Living Beyond Your Limitations, How to Live with Infinite Possibilities. And that's at 1 o'clock at the Kent Commons on March the 24th. And Janet, tell them about your stuff.
Well, in my Zoom groups, please consider if any of this today particularly resonated, you can participate with me in a small group setting, and the group dynamics are just, it makes so much happen. And you'll find compassionate witnessing, you'll find laughter, you'll find all kinds of things when we sit together, and we do it over that Zoom video conferencing, so you get to see everybody and their names, and it's a live interaction happening, so it's just a whole lot of fun. And those are on Thursdays now from 10 a.m. Pacific, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific, 2 hours there. And contact me at contact me at janetb@janetandbeyond.com to get your registration packet and information. And it's a really reasonable price. You set the price, and join us. And you will never be the same. I can guarantee that. And we've had such good information from people already. So I think that's it. Oh, and then your consciousness cookies, and those every day, a little something to just bring your attention back to consciousness. So.
Sounds good.
Life is good.
Well, we would like to thank everyone for listening. There is no time or space, so regardless of when you're listening to this, you actually helped co-create this in the moment, and we appreciate your contribution to our morphic field. You've been listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. I'm your host, Joan, and this is Janet. And
thanks, everyone.
Tune in next week, same time, same channel.
You've been listening to Conscious Conversations with Joan and Janet. And thanks so much for helping to co-create the show, no matter if you're listening live or on demand. You energetically contribute to our collective experience. Joan and Janet love to hear from you and invite you to email your comments and ideas for them to explore each week. Contact them at consciouswithjoanandjanet@gmail.com. Tune in next week for another great show, and until then, keep enjoying this wonderful adventure we call life.